toughest adventure race, the Sony Polar Challenge.
Race 2011.
Minus 49 degrees. First woman born in Africa to
The races will cover 350,000 nautical miles of
25
sea
days.
ice. Competitors must cross one of the planet's most extreme
South African Lee Swan has become the first
Swan,
African,
manager of Deloitte Sustainability and Climate
and all in the
Change.
name of climate
Nothing
change.
like the adventurous spirit in us all.
Doing the race is also something that makes your heart beat.
Really hard, and now we're gonna just go out and do it. Have a great time. All right, we're here. We're in Resolute Bay. We made it. I'm really excited about the next month we have ahead of us.
We're a united team from different nations. My name's Ryan Malfera from Toronto, Canada. This is Rob Platt. He's from the UK, and Lee Swan. She's here from South Africa.
And it feels like it's a negative 100 outside. It's very cold out.
Certainly feeling a long way from the beach in Mozambique where I trained for this. It's definitely not tropical weather where we are now.
Well, they say that every journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. And my journey to the magnetic North Pole did start with a single step, yes, but it ended more than 2.5 million steps later, each one of those taken one painfully at a time. Now, if you've never heard of the polar race, let me give you a few facts and figures. The polar race takes place every 2 years. It's a race that you do need to qualify for. Over 300 people tried to qualify for this race, and in 2011, 6 people started. I was lucky enough to be one of those. This is a race that covers, as the crow flies, 650 kilometers from the second most northern town in Canada, which is called Resolute, to the magnetic North Pole. You're expected to navigate yourself over the frozen ocean, which is why on Google Maps it looks like you walk on water. Not too many people who know how to do that. It's over the frozen ocean. You do this in a team with other people. You tow a sled, which weighs an average of about 65 or 70 kilograms behind you, with all of your equipment, including a tent, a pump-action shotgun. I'll tell you about that later. All your food and fuel as well, in order to survive. And you do all of this at an average temperature of minus 40 degrees Celsius. Now, if you think that sounds like a strange thing to be doing, let me tell you a few things about myself. My name is Lee Swan, and I am a chocoholic. I love red wine, and I love high-heel shoes. I'm from Joburg, so for all intents and purposes, I'm an ordinary Joburg girl. I'd never even run a marathon before setting my sights on Magnetic North. And here I was, having to change myself from ordinary girl to polar racer. Now, a lot of people ask me, why would you do something like that? Most people can't understand that, particularly given my affinity for chocolate and red wine and heels. And really what I'm after is an extraordinary life. I want to be extraordinary Lee, not ordinary Lee. And I mean an extraordinary life by my definition, not by anybody else's. Really for me to define what does extraordinary mean for me, and then to live that, make the commitment to live it. And so in defining extraordinary for myself, I thought, well, first things first, I reckon you've got to be pretty balanced as a person. And for me, balance must mean balance physically, balance emotionally, balance mentally. And if you put me in any intellectual or emotional situation, I'm quite confident. If you put me in a physical situation, ask me to run a marathon with you, I'll be washing my hair that day. So really, on the way to extraordinary Lee, I thought, well, I have to find physical balance. And what better way to do that than to enter yourself into what's known as the world's toughest race, right? And to change from ordinary Lee into polar racer on my way to extraordinary, I obviously had to learn how to do a few things. I'd never run more than sort of 10 kilometers in my entire life up to that point. So I had to become a long-distance endurance athlete who not only do the distance, but has got muscles that are powerful enough that I'm not only getting my own body weight over that distance, but I'm also towing a sled which weighs the same as me behind. I needed to learn to ski. I'd never skied before, so I had to get onto some skis, and that was a bit of a comedy action show. And then I had to learn a few things about cold and also about polar bears, because the race passes through polar bear territory, and at the time of year that we would be racing, the polar bears are on migration, and they've got cubs with them. So this is dangerous territory. Has anyone here ever been for polar bear body language lessons? Okay, well, you come speak to me if you ever need help with that. I have, so I know a thing or two, and all you need to know is you never want to see a thin polar bear. And associated with polar bear body language lessons, should you figure out that this polar bear is hungry or aggressive, you then also have a pump-action shotgun with you, and you know how to use it. And I'm embarrassed to say that all through qualifying for this race, being a girl from Joburg, embarrassingly, I actually had the best aim out of anybody. All 300 people, and I had the best aim. So that's a condition of being from Joburg, I think. Then you need to find some people to do this with, because this is not a solo race. I don't think I would do it solo anyway. So you have to find some other crazy people to do it with. And I partnered up with these two crazy guys, Rob and Ryan. And if you're looking at Rob in the middle there, that's as good as he ever looked. He didn't look any better than that. And really, after 18 months or slightly over 18 months of training and dedicating your life in pursuit of magnetic north on your way to extraordinary, really all you're trying to do is get yourself to this dinky little hideous town. It's an Eskimo town in northern Canada called Resolute, and ultimately to stand in this position. So that's me on the far right. So after 18 months of training, standing at the start line of the Polar Race 2011. Now this should have been an exciting moment and slightly terrifying. And really for me, it was a very calm moment. And the question you're having to ask yourself when you stand there is, have I done enough? There's no more time to train. There's no more time to prepare or ask questions. You're standing at the start line and you're about to go into the Arctic wilderness with two companions, and you are on your own. And the answer for me was, of course, yes. I'd looked back at how far I'd come. From an ordinary girl, I ran marathons, trained like a lunatic in order to get here. So I'd already overcome so many barriers that I'd placed on myself. And so I learned, or I realized that even just standing at the start line here, I've grown. What I found amusing, though, was that it didn't feel good to grow. It was truly painful. And I would suggest that that's probably the case for our wider lives, even if you aren't doing this kind of race. So really, the question you're having to ask yourself is, have I done enough? Do I trust that I've got what it takes now? Because this isn't any more fun and games. Going into minus 40 degrees Celsius, and there is nowhere to go if something goes wrong. You have to rely completely on yourself. And on that basis, off we went. We set out on the race, and this is what a day in the life of a polar racer looks like. Towing your sled, which weighs 65 kilograms, skiing and walking all of this distance. Also, what I did find, actually, they say the race is 650 kilometers as the crow flies, but there are a couple of things that make it significantly longer, which you underestimate. One is kind of twists and turns on the route, and the other is the fact that you are traveling on a frozen piece of sheet ice on the ocean, which is drifting south, and you are walking north. So ultimately, the distance comes out at about 800 or 820 kilometers, which is quite a lot further than 650. But really, this is what the sort of racing pattern looks like. I was usually in the middle. I didn't want to get chowed by a polar bear, and polar bears usually swipe the guys at the back. So the guy at the back is the guy with the pump-action shotgun. The race rules say that you have to split the ammunition for the gun. So the person with the gun has a certain amount of ammunition, and the next closest person to him has to have ammunition as well, so that you can resupply should things start to go wrong. And so that was me. So underneath that hideous red suit, I had a belt of live ammunition, because it has to stay warm in order to work. So you become very casual about these things as the race goes on. So I always laugh. I think of myself as the girl version of Rambo, but not quite Angelina yet. And really, what I had expected the race to be, this is a photograph taken of us by the Canadian Air Force. And this was about 150 kilometers outside of Resolute. So in this series of photographs, you can see me in the middle waving to the aircraft. And The pilot eventually tracked our team down and sent these photographs to us and said, "Thanks so much for waving at me." Meanwhile, I think I was like, "Get me the hell out of here, please. No, land that plane. No, I need to go home." But he thought we were just being friendly. And what I thought, actually, when we set out on this race, and in my imagination while I was preparing for this race and visualizing it, I'd actually thought, well, surely when we start out from Resolute, given this is over the ocean, it's going to be like an ice skating rink, flat pretty much all the way to the pole. It's at sea level. There's not a lot of hills on the sea, I don't think. So I'd expected the sort of flat skating rink all the way, and I just had to deal with the cold and a couple of polar bears. When in reality, actually, about 80% of the race looked like this. Now, to give you an idea of scale, someone my height stands about that tall. So not only are you getting yourself over these huge ice boulders, but you're also towing a second center of gravity behind you over this as well, and you're largely doing it on skis. And so your pace slows down significantly. So days where we had expected to be on our feet for 8 or 9 hours turned into 18 or 19-hour days as a result of this kind of terrain. And together, we all slept in the same tent along the way. It's not a particularly warm tent. It's just got sort of reinforced seams to block the wind slightly, but it is wafer thin and it's very light. I actually thought, fantastic, I've hit the jackpot. I get to camp in a tent for over a month with 2 guys. Who gets an excuse to do that? What I hadn't realized is that you're actually wearing the same clothes for 30 days or over 30 days. And so it's not a very pleasant smelling tent. But what amazes me when I look back at these kinds of photographs is that it just looks like a frosty camping scene. I know we've got a few people who've been in this position before, up and down Everest in the room. What amazes me, though, is this is a dinky little tent that we would sleep at night. Well, there is no night, it's 24-hour daylight. But it's camped on top of a 6-foot thick crust of ice, which floats on top of a 4.5-kilometer deep ocean. And somehow you manage to sleep at night. And so when I look at these photographs, that is what I'm thinking about. How amazing is that? There's certainly some sort of grace that has allowed us to do that as mere human beings. And you certainly feel very small in the bigger context of things. Now, when you go to the Arctic, of course, you need to know a thing or two about cold, and they say to you, fine, average temperature is minus 40 degrees Celsius. The coldest temperature that I could train in South Africa was minus 20, which I look back at and snigger to myself as it being so naive to even attempt trying to feel that way. But really, at minus 40, to give you a sense of how cold this actually is, when you get off the plane at Resolute, they say to you a couple of things. One, if you have a bare hand out in the air, it's going to be frozen in under a minute, and it will take you days to get any movement back into that hand. So don't have any exposed skin, and certainly not in your extremities. The second is keep your mouth shut, and me being a chatty person, that was quite hard, because your tongue is probably going to freeze if your mouth is hanging open for too long. And thirdly, you need to blink a lot more often than you would ordinarily, because your eyeballs are at risk of freezing. So if I blink a lot while I'm in your company, it's not because I'm a dodgy character, it's because I'm in the habit of blinking to save my eyeballs. And really, you learn a lot of lessons about the cold that nobody can teach you before you go. Most of them I learned the hard way. On about day 5 of the race, we had done about 120 kilometers at this point, obviously knackered by that point. We had set out on a beautiful, clear day, ready to kind of hit the road, try and do our sort of targeted 45 kilometers for the day. And you need to be pretty comfortable doing that, so all your equipment needs to be fitting perfectly. And we'd done 2 or 3 kilometers, and my harness on my left shoulder was pulling a bit awkwardly. So I asked the guys to please stop, I just need to make an adjustment. But awkwardly, the harness was so finicky and little, the adjustments I needed to make, that I had to take my glove off, make the adjustment, and put my glove back on in order to just get comfortable. But it was probably a 10-second job. That could have been done quite quickly as long as you were organized and well-planned about it. And that is what I did. So we stopped. I was in my skis with the sled still attached to me, took the glove off, made the sort of change, and somehow managed to fall over and put my bare hand down on the ice. Now, if you have a bare hand down on the ice at minus 40, I can tell you for a fact that it freezes in under 15 seconds. Because what had happened, basically, it took me about 15 seconds to push myself back up, pull my hand round, try and get the glove back on, and when I looked at my hand, all of the blood had drained out of my hand, and it looked like the hand of a corpse. So this hand that I'd known for 30 years suddenly didn't feel like it was attached to me, and I couldn't move it. So of course they said, whatever happens, don't panic, and that's exactly what I did, was panic, and had to ask the two guys for help. So it took me about 3 days to get any real movement back in my right hand, and to this day, almost a year later, I still can't feel parts of my hand, and I don't have a lot of gripping power. So if you ever see me open a bottle of water, it's usually with my left hand now. So a 15-second mistake could be potentially having a lifetime implication. And to make matters worse, a couple of days after that happened, which was terrifying, we set out to another beautiful day, ready to do our distance for the day, bearing in mind that we're in a race. So you've got to be out on the ice and be keen. And we could see some storm clouds on the distance and set out, no worries. And within an hour, the storm was basically upon us. And what we had heard after the race is that the air temperature was minus 42 degrees that day. The wind speed was 40 knots, which is about 72 kilometers an hour, which is how these clouds happened upon us so quickly and unexpectedly. And with that wind chill factor on minus 42, it actually drops the real air temperature to minus 79, which is dangerously cold. You can't even feel what's painful anymore at that temperature. And to make matters worse with this wind speed and the clouds above us, we got caught in a whiteout condition. So there are actually two people at the center of that photograph. So what do you do in this whiteout condition? I mean, we couldn't see anything. It was desperately cold. Our lives are within an inch of being taken away from us. And I stopped the group and said, listen, I'm terrified. I can't go on. And both of them said, absolutely, we agree. Let's get this tent up. So what we did is we got our tent up, and at 40 knot wind, it's quite a difficult task. Somehow we got it up with a bit of teamwork, and we bundled ourselves into this tent. Now we were stuck in that tent for 2.5 days. And slowly but surely, hour after hour, we started to get buried by snow. And we had to dig ourselves an airway out from the front door of the tent in order to make sure that we were getting enough air to keep breathing. So it becomes quite a somber place, and we were each in our own heads. And to remind myself that, hopefully things will be okay, I started to remember the last conversation I'd had with my mom, and on the telephone before I set out on the race. And she had said to me, stay safe, stay strong, we love you. And of course that brought some warmth to me, which was fantastic, and I was sort of glowing in the warmth of love from my mother, until I realized if I don't get out of this situation, I may actually be recalling the last words that my mom has ever said to me. And weirdly enough, I couldn't recall the last words I had said to her. So that was a bit of a somber situation. But to try and cheer myself up again, I started to think about the charity that I was working with in training for the pole, the Leap Science and Maths School, and some of the kids had written me emails and letters before I set out. And I got the book of letters out and started to read through those. And one of them ended like this. And this is a 16-year-old girl from the township in Johannesburg who's saying words to me that made me feel like things were going to be okay. Before you know it, you'll be back home. And so after another day of sitting in the tent after reading this, eventually we got ourselves out, and a new day did dawn, clear skies, and I think we were so happy just to be alive. We had to dig our tent out, which took 4 or 5 hours, just to get the tent out of the snow, and off we went on our happy way. And I think we were just so delighted to be alive that we almost skipped the rest of the way to the pole. There was still 400 kilometers to go from here, but I think we were just delirious to be alive. So there was huge energy in order to actually finish the last bit of the journey. On the last day, this is about 5 kilometers outside of the pole, so we're going to basically hang a left from this position and then go for another 5 kilometers. We reached the magnetic North Pole on the 27th of April 2011. And I realized this at round about this point, that the date in South Africa, this is Freedom Day. It means something special as a South African. And here I was about to become the first South African and African woman to reach the magnetic North Pole. So there's some sort of destiny in that. And I started to get the sense that I've come on the right track to get here. Even though having an African girl stand at the pole seems odd, it feels completely right now that we're here. And eventually we got ourselves to the pole. Now, any hardened adventurer will know what this photograph is showing. Usually when you reach your destination, you'll take a photograph of your watch and your GPS, so you can prove your time of arrival, and you can prove that you've got 0 kilometers to go to get to your destination. So no one really will appreciate these photos except people who take them. And of course, cheesy photos of us with our handy GPSs. A couple of self-photos when you get to the pole, and finally you raise the South African flag that you've been carrying all of this way. And really, this was quite a lonely moment for me, even though it was jubilant. Really what you want is your family and your countrymen around you. And after this huge journey, 820 kilometers in the end, at minus 40, living with 2 really stinky guys along the way, not sure if I'm ever going to feel my hand again, I kind of look and feel the same. I've gone back into my sort of normal life. I've gone back to my day job. But so much has changed. My DNA has completely changed. And I look back and just think, well, what are the lessons learned? I set out to take a step towards being extraordinarily, and what did I learn? And what I came to realize, it took me some time after coming back from the pole, what I've come to realize is that my limits were only ever in my head to start with. They were only ever in my head. And actually, we don't have limits beyond the ones that we perceive of ourselves. If a girl who loves chocolate and red wine can walk 820 kilometers to the magnetic North Pole, then that's surely got to be true. Right? Now, every single day, back in my normal life, I face my addiction to limits every day. And so the question that I would pose to you is, as fellow Africans, when are you going to face your addiction? Thank you.